Hi, I am Mark Malkoff, and welcome to Inside Late Night, presented by LateNighter.com. Today's guest is journalist, author Bill Carter, best known for The Late Shift. He's currently editor-at-large at LateNighter.com. We talk about SNL, Everybody's Live with John Mulaney, and much more. Now, it's time to go inside Late Night. Bill Carter, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Mark. You don't look any different from the last time I saw you.
Right back at you. Saturday Night Live, I want to talk about the 50th. I have so much to talk about and a lot of strong opinions, but I do want to mention that you were there for the 50th anniversary for the Radio City big
Concert, yeah.
music concert. What was that like? What was your experience? I know you talked to the power players like Smigel and a bunch of these people. You have known these people
Right.
for a long time. What was your takeaway from the event? What stands out?
Well, it was two kind of takeaways, I think. It was very entertaining. It really was really entertaining. They did a great job doing the music and having some funny material as well. And it felt a little bit like an extension. They couldn't possibly get all these people into the actual 50th show. And it was smart. So they did a separate concert in a really big venue. And so they could invite, thousands of people. So that was really cool. And the atmosphere was really great. You know, uh, I thought people were totally enthused, and it went over extremely well. And Radio City has a big lobby, and they had a bar and all that kind of stuff, and you could sort of hang out there. And so I ran into Seth Meyers, and I ran into Susan Morrison actually, who wrote the Lauren book, and I ran into Smigel and a lot of other people, and we just were just saying how great it was and how amazing it was to be here for the 50th. And I felt the same way because I went to the 25th, I went to the 40th. I interviewed Lauren the first season of the show, uh, and I certainly saw the first show and wrote about the first show. So I felt really like it was, a real significant part of my life, actually, uh, wrapped up in this one event.
I thought it was interesting. Smigel told you at the Radio City show that he said, "I think Mike Myers should do Elon Musk," and then be like a week later, it happened.
Yes, incredible. And at first I was like, "Well, I don't know if Myers is good. I guess it would be funny." But when you saw it, it was like, yes, he is the right guy. Uh, so I don't know if he actually publicized that and it got into Lauren's ear or whatever, or Mike Myers' ear or something. But it was prescient for sure.
It never occurred to me that the Radio City show would be more acclaimed than the actual 50th and 8H. Very different shows. You're on network television. I get that, but the people that I talked to and the stuff that I saw online and the enthusiasm, the takeaway I got from the public and the critics, way overwhelming, was that the Radio City show was the thing that really took the prize in terms of production.
Yeah, there was a real tremendous energy to it. Uh, it didn't feel like you know in every SNL they have the issue of setting up, and all that sort of stuff. And for the anniversary, they narrow the stage down so much that there are limitations. I remember from the 40th, but it's just I think it was hard to maintain that kind of energy and. You had to make choices there. Do you do the classics? Bring back all the classics, or do you, you know, do something more contemporary? And I still was entertained by it. I thought it was good. But I do think the concert thing was high energy and super entertaining. And it really was great to be in the audience.
Two things from a cosmetic standpoint I just want to mention. One, they didn't show this because it would take away, but there were so many empty seats, and they could have had more people that like Mark Malkoff or other people there. Why do you think that there were so many empty seats?
You mean at the Radio City one?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. There were some around me. Um, I guess they overbooked. I don't know, and then people didn't show up. I don't know. I really don't know because the people that were. I was not down in the front, and around me, I couldn't tell who these people were. Were they NBC people? Like employees at times. Uh, so I wasn't sure who the entire arena of people they invited was. But there were empty seats for sure.
it was a casting service that they had, which all the award shows do, where they had a lot of younger people that submitted online, and you had to give your photo, and they had all the young people. And I get it; they have to, SNL. It's young, and just to have that energy in. But it seemed like for that the pit and some of the people in the front row. Fallon even brought in one of the people that was a seat filler, I think, next to John Hamm the whole night. It seemed like completely casted, from at least somebody that worked in entertainment. I'm looking at it. The public looking at it, I not so much. It was, but
I could not tell because I was downstairs whether the upstairs was full.
yeah,
I couldn't tell. It just you could tell when you were going in. You could tell there's a tremendous amount of people here. It was
sure.
quite a crush getting in, but I did notice there were empty seats for sure.
Yeah, I just thought that that was highly unusual, but I get it. You're the one that told me because you got an advanced copy of Susan Morrison's book, Lorne, and it was one of those things. I'm like, I don't know if I want to ask Bill this question, but we talked on the phone, and I said, um, "How is the book? Did you learn anything? Because it's one of those things where I've been wanting to read this forever, and it just it could go either way. And no one has ever tried to that I'm aware of really." Try to take this complex guy and do something like this justice. And you told me, Mark, it was so good. I learned things I didn't know. And I'm like, if Bill Carter is learning things that I do not know,
Yes,
Susan Morrison has hit a grand slam, and she
yeah.
did.
I thought it was great. I mean, maybe you have to be a real acolyte of the show to really fully appreciate all of the detail about the show, which was interesting. I think she made a very interesting decision to do an actual show week and demonstrate what they're doing, which I think for me, I love that kind of stuff. Now, maybe the average reader's like, I don't care what they're doing in rehearsal, but I was really interested in that. But I also felt like it captured aspects of Lauren I just didn't know about. I mean, I just didn't know a
What
whole
is
lot of
something?
California stuff and all of that. It just it filled in a lot of blanks, and it also captured his character. It was not a hagiography. He it showed him being sort of a name dropper and a celebrity screw. You know what I mean? He had that aspect. She didn't shy away from that, which is really interesting because I thought he gave her extraordinary access. Obviously, extraordinary. She was talking to him like every Friday night for months and months and months, a year. I don't know. It was years. Actually, it was years in the making.
I had never heard Lorne Michaels in an interview setting, and I guess he got so comfortable with her, he just dropped being public persona. But when he was talking about Chris Smith with the New York Magazine,
Yes,
I guess, and I just with he said something. I hope his teeth hurt, and a couple other things. I'm like, wow, because
yes,
it's like in my head, I'm like, I know that this guy has his opinions and feels this way about people, but he's been in some interviews, he's like, I still remember the guy's name and things like that. But for him to actually drop his guard and hear opinions like this, I'm like, I've never.
yeah. How many years later? How many years later was that after that interview? That was a long time,
It's been 30
but that
years, and
cut deep. That interview really cut deep. And I remember when I read it at the time, I thought it was kind of over the top. But uh, you know, the thing is, you become a celebrity. He's a celebrity now. He's not just a producer. He's a celebrity. He's a player, really, on the show, and always has been. So you forget sort of he's just a regular guy too, and he look. I found some little things fascinating. He walks to work. I didn't know he walks to work. I found that fascinating. He's just walking in the street. I don't know. Was he wear a hat? It's New York, so people don't bother you that the way they would in L.A., for example, if you're a celebrity. But I found that really interesting, and some of his crazy friendships were, just extraordinary. He has a separate house separate room for Paul McCartney and his in his Long Island house. I mean, like all kinds of nutty details like that.
the Jack Nicholson room.
The Jack Nicholson room and the Paul room, where I forget which of the newcomers came in and said he said, and he's generous to people. He's very generous, and he said, you have no place to stay. Come out, to where Quag or wherever his house is, but that's Jack's room. Like it's just amazing.
One thing in the book I wanted to ask you about. So you have in 1980. This is not in the book, but in 1980, Johnny Carson takes control of the ownership of the Tonight Show. leverage. I mean, they NBC needed Carson. You have David Letterman who got, and I'm talking about the late night shows, that genre. You have Dave Letterman in '93, which got ownership of he launched a show on CBS, The Late Show, complete ownership.
Yeah,
CBS needed him. How does Lorne Michaels get 50% ownership of SNL?
that was a fascinating detail too. I mean, I don't know when that happened, but I thought when I read that, I remember I said to Jed, "This feels like news to me that he's had 50% ownership since when?
How?
How did it happen? It was obviously in an extension of his contract, I presume."
I would get I would guess it would happen probably if I had to guess, and this is just me, guessing, probably sometime in the '80s where they did not foresee that this was gonna be. I mean, what would they were hawking, like, like VHS, tapes on TV, but in terms of it being lucrative and the ownership and the reruns and everything, I think that is the only way I could foresee NBC thinking that this would be something that they could maybe give Lauren 50%, that
Yeah.
wouldn't impact them as
Yeah,
much.
I guess. I mean, they were doing things back then. I mean, they gave away a huge amount to Warner Brothers for renewal of ER at some point in time. I remember that. And when they got pushed into corners, they made deals like that. But it just seems like they didn't think ahead. Like, what would the value of this be?
That's
You
it.
know, and and it's true in late night. Obviously, things are mostly ephemeral. It's the monologue jokes from 20 years ago don't hit the same as they would now. But but you see what it's worth. It's now a tremendous value, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Lauren got, reported something like $200 million for
Yes.
50% of his share. Comcast,
Yeah.
bought it back. In terms of the other people that were behind the desk, the only other person I think that I've heard publicly mention that they thought that they could have gotten ownership was Jay Leno, so that he probably could have gotten if he wanted, which he didn't want, which I don't know why you would not want to own. And Conan, of course, with TBS. If we're talking a major network,
Yeah.
I think that's it. Conan did get
I remember talking to Jay about it. I remember saying, "Everybody else has got, Dave got the ownership. You could get it. I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't have to deal with that. I don't wanna deal with that." And he just didn't want the whatever extra complication it would be for his interest in the show. And he obviously had a ton of money. He wasn't, like, hurting for money. And he wound up basically banking all of NBC's money while he lived off his gig money. So he's not. He didn't like. He hated all the business aspects of. That's why he didn't even have an agent. After Helen left, he just had his lawyer doing things. He really disdained that kind of thing.
He disdained it, but when it was in his interest to politic, he was the first one
Oh,
to do
absolutely.
it.
As long as he had what he wanted, which is what he wanted to, if he could have, to host the show until he died, probably, right? He probably wanted that. That's what he wanted. He wanted that. And that was the prime thing. And they could give him that. They kept giving him that until they decided to not give him that.
I could not believe when we're recording this was yesterday. This was big news on something that was long ago that I don't really understand why it made so much media. It got media coverage, which was that Jay was interviewed recently. Leno was on In Depth with Graham, Betzinger, I believe that's how you say his name, and he was talking about how when Jay was doing the Jay Leno show at 10 o'clock, and you had Jimmy
Right.
Kimmel come on. They did this segment every night where ask, I don't know, is it 5 or 10 questions?
10 at 10. Yeah.
And Jimmy, did this thing where Leno later said he felt he was sucker punched, which, what's I believe it was like, "What is the best prank you ever pulled?" to Kimmel, and Kimmel said, I said once I was gonna give a guy a talk show 4 years later, and then 4 years later, I decided to keep it," or something like that.
Yeah.
And Jay said, now looking back, I could have cut that out. I didn't. It was a mistake. I learned from my mistakes. And it's okay that it happened. I learned, but at the same time, you could still tell, like, I wouldn't do that if I were him. And it's like, to me personally, it's like the reason we're having this conversation. It seemed like Jay was kind of like making himself out to be the victim, where it's like, no, you took Conan's show, you quote did a white lie. That's what Jay's words. I told a white lie that I was okay with it, and
Mhm.
that was, once he said that and put that out into people's ear and stuff. I mean, how I don't understand how he's the victim in anything.
He's a different sort of comic in a way. Like if you watch Jimmy, you know Jimmy was going to come after him, right? They invited Jimmy on. He was doing it on the air. He was killing. He was doing. He remember he did a full face,
Yeah.
makeup job to look at. So he was coming after him on the air. So then he invites him on the show. Does he think he won't come after him on the show? And what was stunning, I remember watching. It was like Jay's not prepared. He's not prepared to come back. If you're a comic in those situations, you come back.
Jay is very good at the comebacks too, and it wasn't. And I do give Jay, I do say at 10 o'clock, Jay was under a lot of pressure to get ratings, and they were struggling. So I get keeping that in. That got a lot of press for that show,
Yes,
but
but Mark, if he had taken that out, he would have been crucified by Kimmel, who probably would have put it on his air in some fashion. I mean, he would have killed him for that. I think it was the only move to make. After he did it, you can't cut it out. You look like a coward. You just look like a coward.
I just do not understand how that was an unfair thing to do because people, like for example, like Dave would go on Johnny's show and poke fun at him for working 3 days a week,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
people go on shows. Chris Rock, I know, went on Letterman show at one point, and when Letterman was going through his marriage stuff, and it was just like it was something that was out there, elephant in the room. It happened, and for that for Jay to have such a problem with that and be talking about it, and he says it haunts him still to this day, it's like all you had to do was publicly say that you weren't okay with NBC saying in 4 years that but he did say that he was okay with it, and I don't know if he welcomed it or what, but I mean, it was a lousy decision no matter what that they did that. I have empathy for Jay, like, you're number 1, why would they possibly wanna move you. But at the same time, I mean, what was NBC supposed to do?
Well, it was an interesting. Obviously, I wrote a whole book about it, so it was interesting that they did want to avoid the Letterman Leno thing that happened before. So what did they do? They give Conan the show with a 5 year wait. 5 years. So Conan was hot as a pistol at the time, really, really hot. And he could have said, "I'm not waiting 5 years. I'm going to Fox right now." Right. And at that
20,000,000
time,
they
Fox could have cleared the show, and he would have been on Fox. He could have said that, but he, like the other guys, wanted the Tonight Show. So he agreed to park his career for 5 years, park it, while he waited for Jay, figuring, and they all figured, well, in 5 years, Jay will want to leave, or maybe his ratings will be down. Well, they didn't know Jay if they thought he'd want to leave, but that they set that up, they set that in motion. And for Jay, and they come to him, they say, "We love you. We're extending you for another 5 years." And he didn't like the idea that there was a termination date, but at that point, he was like, "How can I say no to this?" And then Conan leaves, and then I have another guy competing with me, right? This is all in his head. And he has nobody really advising him. He doesn't have a killer agent. If he has a killer agent in these circumstances, he has way more leverage than he showed. He had way more leverage than he
I think
displayed.
Jay regrets, and I think if he had to maybe go back, he would have given up the show and let Conan do his thing. I really, really think that I don't think he would say that publicly, maybe, but I mean,
He wouldn't have done the 10 o'clock show, is what you're saying.
I don't think he would do the 10 o'clock show, or he would have, like, at least, like, been like, "Okay, this didn't work and this was a failure, and I'm gonna leave and do
Yeah.
something else for NBC." Rather than I think he regrets, what happened with the whole, taking Conan's show. I mean, for Jay to publicly say, and I talked to him once about this, to be like, if Conan's show was better, I'm like, you know, 8 months is not long enough for anybody to figure that out. Colbert has been number 1 for years, and he did not figure that out in 8 months. Nobody does. Jay, and I told him this when we talked, and I was polite, but I said your first year, you were having stumbling blocks all left and right. You didn't figure it out in 8 months. So how's Conan going to figure this out in 8 months?
But the problem with that is that the affiliates were killing it. They were killing NBC for Jay's terrible ratings at 10 o'clock and Conan's bad rating. Conan was behind Letterman. Okay, we fell behind Letterman, and so the affiliates were killing him. They basically
Yeah.
canceled Jay. They canceled Jay's 10 o'clock show, and Jay could have walked away at that point. He could have said, "I failed. I was canceled. I'm going to do something else now." I'll do something else now. But he's a tremendous creature of habit, Jay. He really is. That's why he didn't take ownership. He just wanted to do his thing. He wanted to drive to the studio in one of his classic cars and do a show, finish the show, and then fly to Vegas and do an act.
I do want to mention, and I know I've said this before, but I think worth mention. The nicest guy if you're not competing against him in terms of like fans coming up to him for photos. In terms of like him being nurturing for other comedians, as long as his staff, you hear stories from people that worked for him and stuff. A great guy. And I know he's going through some hardships now and stuff, and you
Yes.
empathize and stuff. It's just competing against him. I would not want to do, but I mean, there's a lot of really good things, and we have to give him credit for being number one. But I just couldn't believe that thing was rehashed, the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing from the Jay Leno show.
It's interesting to me because in the times that I've talked to Jay since this, he's never really said anything, but you could tell it was inside him still bubbling that he had that thing with because Jimmy Kimmel will say, my interchanges with Jay have become nice, like they kind of get alongside him. You know that Jay is boiling about it inside. He's boiling about it. But he's been a number one guy. The big problem, the real big problem with it, in my opinion, is Jay had the number one spot. But if you ask people what is his legacy, what did he bring? That is a big problem. He doesn't have the same ongoing resonance as certainly Letterman and now Conan is on fire, right? He doesn't have that, and he would say it doesn't bother him because he was more interested in doing his whatever, but he didn't advance the show in some significant way.
I
You know what
think
I
he
mean?
really thought that being number 1 was gonna be
Was
enough,
enough. Yeah.
and if people look at Honeymooners, Perry Como was number 1, and people do not remember Como, they remember the Honeymooners, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things, I mean, when I worked with you for CNN, you're a Webby Award-winning host, and I
Right.
was one of the producers, and we did this, thing for CNN, a podcast, and, before that, you the history of late night, which I was, featured in, that was nice enough to be in, but Jay was supposed to talk about his legacy and talk about the Tonight Show,
Yeah.
and a half hour before you're supposed to film with him, and you have the crew and everything's lit, he calls you, and what does he say?
He says he's not doing it because Dave wouldn't do it.
A half hour before he tells you this, he could have not just
I was
said, "I don't
driving
wanna
in from the
do it."
airport. I had landed that morning. I was driving in from the airport, and he called me and said, I'm not doing it." And he said, "Because, Dave won't do it, and then I'll look bad." And I said, "You won't look bad. Who cares what Dave's doing? You're a giant in late night on your own. You don't. What does it matter what Letterman does or doesn't do? No, no. I'll just get slammed for it. I'll get slammed for it." I said, "You won't get slammed for it if you do it. I mean, if he did it and you didn't do it, you might get slammed for it. But if you do it, you look better than he does."
What would he get slammed for? I don't understand that, and Debbie Vickers, I thought, did a fantastic job,
He
John
did.
Max did great,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah. I mean,
I
I just think he is psychologically. Look, he got killed for stabbing his friend in the back. That was the metaphor for him getting the job over Dave. You know, and Dave did not feel he was like close friends with Jay, but they certainly had a lot of interaction. They were, yes, and everybody in the business, I think, thought, well, Dave's getting the show. I mean, he put in his time; he's going to get the show. And Jay wanted the show, so he was willing to say, "I don't care what happens to Dave."
I I
Kind of.
I I do wanna mention, and I don't know if we've talked about this, I don't think so, the one thing that about Letterman, about him being, thinking that we're gonna give him the Tonight Show, well, there's no question in my mind, and I think in everybody in NBC, that Dave is a host when he was doing the NBC show. Phenomenal host, phenomenal product that he was delivering every single night. It's just that if you wanna be given that gig, calling the NBC executives pinheads,
Yeah.
making fun of GE, and, certain allegedly, I don't know what this is true, that certain people at GE wanted their teenagers to have tickets to be able to see Dave, and Dave said, we don't do that."
I haven't heard that story, but it's believable, completely believable. Because but the reason that Dave was great is because he was that kind of guy.
Agreed 100%, but if you want to be getting that gig, and you're making fun at the network, you have to at least in your head know that, Jay's going to all the affiliates, he's
That's
doing
right.
all this, and you are not, that this could
That's
go
right.
a separate way, that they were.
Dave is terrible at glad handing. He hates it, and he's bad at it. He's very awkward, so in a lot of social situations, which he has said on the air, and people don't believe it. People will say, like, Regis would say, "Come on, we're going to dinner," and Dave says, "I don't go to dinner with anybody," and they all laugh. But it was true. It was true. He didn't do those kind of things, so it was outside of what his
I get
regular
that.
life was like, and so he wouldn't do it. But you're right. NBC thought we can get a guy who'll do anything for us. Well, Jay will do anything to keep that job.
Wasn't it like, the Rick Ludwin, CeCe Bickers thing? It was at the,
Yes,
in 1990, it was the 10th anniversary
yes,
at Radio City where Dave had Jack Rollins disinvite Ludwin to the
correct.
party, and, CeCe Bickers was also, not allowed to go, and it was one of those things that came up when they were trying to decide who do we want,
Absolutely.
and I get Dave being maybe upset at the network, but again, it's things like that. I'm not saying he wasn't in the right, I have no idea, I wasn't there, but just not a good thing if you want the gig.
No, he felt snubbed. But when I so one review of the book, The Late Shift, was it was Shakespearean, right? And it was Shakespearean because
Yeah,
you have these two guys competing for a throne, right? And one guy is supremely talented in his performing skill, but has a tragic flaw. And his tragic flaw is he's bad with authority and with people like that. He's bad with that, and he won't do it. He won't suck up. All he needed to do was, why does he have to? So, and even Ludwin was like, okay, he's pissed at the network, but Sissy Biggers like adores the man. So Sissy Biggers was really hurt by this, personally hurt, because she felt she was a giant fan. She loved the show. She loved working with the show, and she thought she was part of the gang, right? And when Dave excluded her too, she said to me, she cried the whole way home on the train. She was really personally devastated, and that got into under Ludwin's skin. And when they were trying at the last minute to negotiate the deal for Dave to maybe get the show, Bob Wright, who was very smart in this whole thing and kind of realized losing Letterman was a giant mistake, but he said to Dave, we can't have you disinviting NBC executives. And Dave was like, oh my God, this is going to be determined by my telling Sissy Biggers she couldn't come to a party? Like that was, and it was enormously important. It seems silly, but that's what Dave didn't get about it. That you have, it's still, he hated all the glad handing and sucking up of show business. He hated that, but sometimes you have to do it. It's smart to do it. So
Dave, there were a few times I can think of where there were people that were on that show late in the later years where I believe where he would say hi to the guests before the show where he didn't want to. He said hi to Meryl Streep. He said hi to Tom Cruise's mom the first time Cruise was on the Late Show, which was like I think the CBS show at that point had been on for like at least a decade. There
yeah,
were certain times that I remember he was writing letters at certain point when Jay overtook him. He was writing letters to certain guests and asking Denzel Washington, "Would you please come on?"
yeah,
There were definitely times where he did that. But the thing about Dave, and I just as a host, and like the NBC, and especially the early CBS when he's putting a lot of time into the show, and then the show turned into something else, which I really did enjoy. It was just very different. It became something different. Is you know that show when Dave after the monologue, some of those bits they would either succeed wildly or they would die. And the
yeah.
fact that you could have something die on the air does not happen now on those late night shows. But the one show that does, which I find fascinating, we were talking about this on the phone, where there is that where something could fall on its face was is Mulaney, Everybody's Live with John Mulaney, which they've only done something like 8 or 9 episodes so far on Netflix. But they can do things like that, and that can happen. What are your thoughts on his show and that element?
I tell you, what I think is crucial is that it's live. Okay, it's live, and you can't fool around with that. You can't edit. You can't go back. You got to do it. You're doing the show live, so it has a spontaneity that feels different now because people just aren't doing that in late night anymore. And I mean, Colbert can have a really great show, it's a funny show, but it looks patched together a lot of the time. Really, he sometimes has a guest that he doesn't say is that night. It was previously done, and it just feels a little bit awkward or mechanical, is what it feels like, instead of spontaneous. And Mulaney, who I think has done some very funny bits and some just awful stuff. I mean, it's like it's not that it's awful; it just looks kind of unplanned and amateurish, unproduced. Actually, is what I'm trying to get at, and it still has charm because of that. There's a certain charm to that. And and one of the pieces I wrote was, if they really, if one of these guys is really worried about late night and what's going to happen, they should do the damn show live. Do it.
Yes. When the phone calls don't go well, I love it. It reminds me of Dave's NBC show that
Yes.
anything can happen at any time and something can go into the
And
ground.
leave it. And if you leave it in, it still has the, if you do it live to tape, at least it's still live to tape. But don't patch the show together. I think that's a mistake. And Mulaney's doing a smart thing there. He also is doing no topical comedy at all, really.
I which I think is great. I mean, it's just and again, doing a show, not having to go out there every single night,
Yes,
which
of course.
breaks people. It's such an interesting experiment. I hope he keeps doing it. I did find it interesting a couple nights ago, and I read this on LateNighter.com, which we're both a part of on Late Nighter, that Fallon, and there's a clip I was watching with Fallon had the actor Josh Hartnett on, and in the middle of it, Hartnett mentioned before the show he got it. I think it was a text from the director of the film that he was plugging. He didn't know the director was going to be in the audience, and Fallon supposedly spontaneously, is like, "Why don't really? He's here. Why don't you come down?" And brought him down. And the director later said he had no idea this
Hmm.
was going to happen. And that was the first thing in a long time that I was just like,
Yes.
that would be great if more stuff like that happened. But I wonder sometimes if Mulaney's show with spontaneity that might have rubbed off on Jimmy subconsciously or maybe consciously.
Well, maybe. I mean, to me, that's exactly what some of these guys should be doing. They should be
Yeah.
embracing unpredictability. That's a very
Danger.
good thing.
There needs to be some danger there on some
Yeah.
on some level, I would think. And I don't know. I mean, I'm the Johnny Carson guy. Some people will say, and I've watched so much Carson, but like when that guy would die on air in
Oh,
terms of and it wasn't even the monologue. He would do desk pieces and stuff, but there was just so much charm. And if you're a good enough comic to be able to come back, but jokes do not bomb anymore on network television on those shows. Very rarely, almost ever.
no, they don't bomb. They don't bomb ever because they're the audience is programmed to respond whether or not it's a joke that works or not. And what's really bad is when they go completely over the top with the clapter,
Yeah.
when they applaud every joke. When Johnny told a joke that was really good, they would laugh and then applaud. It was really good. The audience is telling you it's funny and I really like it. You can't once you applaud everything, there's nothing is good or bad. It's all the same.
Dave hated the clapter. I mean, the host for the most part do. I mean, no one likes clapping. They want the laughs. I mean, clapping, I guess.
The guy who's had the most clapter is Bill Maher. Bill Maher's show is very dense with clapter. I think some of his jokes are still good. I'm not criticizing, but they all get applauded, whether they're good or not. And I just find that, to me, it's off-putting.
I find that very strange, and we've talked about this a little bit, that Saturday Night Live sketches almost never bomb
Yep.
anymore. I mean, the 10-to-1 sketch was almost 90% was going to be silence because the audience was so tired, and it almost didn't matter what you would put in. Once in a while, there would be something that you're like, oh my goodness, it would kill, but almost never. And the fact that, and we've talked about a big reason is they let usually 60 to sometimes 80 standbys in, which are the big fans that are camping out in there. But I almost miss some of the time when sketches just didn't work.
Yeah.
That was how the show was designed. They've said publicly. I've heard Steve Higgins and Lauren say, that this is almost like theater. We put it up. Not everything's going to work, but sketches always work now with the audience. They'll laugh at anything. It
The
seems.
show's completely an institution now. It's an institution now, and I personally sit there sometimes, and I'm just not laughing at all. And the thing is getting laughter, and I'm like, this is only because they're there, and it's an event. It's exciting for the people to be in the audience. They're just thrilled to be there. I'm at Saturday Night Live. I'm going to think everything is great.
All Keenan has to do is put on a grin, and
Yeah,
they start laughing no matter what. If there's a joke, if there's not a joke. I mean, Keenan is unbelievable longevity. There's somebody I really want to bring in. I want to introduce the audience to who is from the Saturday Night Network, and we have John Schneider who is here, who knows I mean, in terms, I think I know a lot about Saturday Night Live, but he's on the same level as Bill Carter and myself for sure, and he does a phenomenal job. And he's interviewed a lot of people in the cast, and I highly recommend that you check out the Saturday Night Network and John's work on YouTube. But John and I were talking before the show, when we were talking about Saturday Night Live, and John, again, as I mentioned, has a lot of knowledge. But Bill, you and I have talked about successors for Lorne Michaels, and if I had to guess, I still think it's going to be probably Tina Fey. I think in terms of her having experience to dealing with the network side, she has the creative side. There's no doubt about that. But in being able to deal with the network, I think she really, if she wants the gig, I think that she would be the most logical person. But I was talking to John before the show, and he had a question for you that I thought was so interesting that I wanted to give it over to John and talk about the future of SNL. And I thought that this was an amazing thing to bring
Well,
up.
now you're really set up, John. This better be a great question.
Well, yeah, thank you. No pressure, but no, seriously, I don't think I'm on the level of you two yet, but I appreciate you having me a part of the conversation. And Bill, it's an honor to meet you. For me, I regularly talk to SNL fans from all over the country and ask them what they want to know about the show. And the successor to Lorne question, I think, has been on everybody's minds. And he
Really?
sort of, put water on the fire at the beginning of the season and said that it's not going to happen right now. But with Ted Sarandos being such a good friend of Lorne's and Netflix diving into live content in the way that they haven't before with the Chris Rock special, and now with Mulaney having his own late night show, I have to think that they're the ones to keep a watch for as to what might happen in a post-Lorne world, because they have the budget and access to potentially put together the competitor to SNL. Right now, it's a monopoly bill, but it could, without Lorne there, the vultures could just come in and start doing their own thing. So I'm curious how you feel about that, if that's the thing to watch out for, or would perhaps someone like Sarandos, who's close with Lorne, be a potential successor option?
You mean as a producer?
Yeah, you never know. I mean, he's at least be involved in the show in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that he's been such a fan of Saturday Night Live. So I think the relationship is one that
Power
it is brought up
player.
a lot.
In
Yeah.
terms of a power player, Sarandos is easily in the top three. I mean, in terms of
Well,
names.
here's the thing. Would they do it on Saturday night directly against Saturday Night Live? That would be that's a real risk to try to do that. Okay, I think if they did it on Sunday night and really did the same kind of show on Sunday night and got some footing on it, that might be smarter. Because I guarantee you, when they first do that show, it's not going to look great. It's going to like Mark said about a late night guy taking 8 months. I mean, it's very hard to mount a show like this. And when Lorne left and they brought in Gene Domaney, it was a disaster, a complete disaster. And so there's you need time and real creativity, etc. I mean, it's a brand. It's an incredible brand. And when people say, "Oh, when Lorne goes, NBC might shut down the show," I mean, that's insane. It is an incredible brand. Without Lorne, it's still an incredible brand.
It's expensive. I mean, couldn't you see the possibility, Bill, of it getting too expensive and a place like Netflix being like, we will, is it out of in 10 years if for some reason network television, I don't know where Peacock's going to be, that the show could live like Monday Night Raw, for example, with everything with wrestling is on Netflix now. And it's just, I mean, it's still WWE.
I do think that. I think that moving to a streaming thing is probably in its future. I mean, clearly. I mean, I just don't think NBC, which now Lorne out of the picture, has 100% control, right, of the show. I doubt they're going to just give this franchise away. They might put it on Peacock, right?
It is on Peacock, right, John?
Yeah. Every episode is airing live on Peacock at the same
Yeah.
time.
So they could they're just shifting other things over to Peacock. I really think that, and it goes back to what Mark and I said. This is an institution now. It's so big that their characters are in commercials as the characters now. They're in the commercials playing characters from the show. It really has enormous cultural breadth of impact now, and I just think as long as NBC is a thing that has value, they're going to keep Saturday Night Live. I mean, it'd be almost the last thing in football, Saturday Night Live in football. Interestingly, live properties, which I think is again something that should not be underestimated. I think that they're going to try to keep it. That's just my feeling. And Lauren will bless somebody. I think
Right.
whoever's going to do this, Lauren's going to have to bless that person, because even if he doesn't actually have a contractual ownership of this, it's his. This is his. Okay, he's created it. He's produced it. He's made every considered decision, but for 5 years or 6 years in the history of the show. So it's still going to be his. And I don't know what you think about Tina Fey, John. I think she's fabulous and brilliant as a comedy writer and conceptual comedy person. But I know Tina a little. I don't know that she wants to do it. I mean, I think it's a big ask, because it takes over your life. So
I just want to interject, and then I want to get it over to John. She lives in New York, number one. Two, her kids are not young
they're not kids
anymore.
anymore. Yes, you're right.
Those are two things, and those are two things just right there that I could see that it could happen. It wouldn't be a life change for her, John.
And I will say one other thing, if I might. When I forget who the person was who was leaving, uh, maybe maybe it was Corden coming in or something, and people were guessing about who it would be. And I was writing a piece about it, and I mentioned that Tina had once said to me, "My kids are little. I'm never going to do that. I can't. I can't be there. I can't do it." And I wrote that, and her manager, John, what's his name?
David Miner,
David Miner. David Miner called me and said, um, "Could you not say that next time?"
that she wanted her own late night
Yeah,
show that she would never want.
yeah. Could you not say it? And I was like, "Well, that's interesting, right? That is really interesting that she wants to be talked about as a possibility for that. So she has the ambition to do something else, and I think that's true. But if Lauren would bless her, so we know that, and there's a very small pool of talent, I think, that could do this. So
John, what do you think?
I think if she wants it, she's probably going to get it. But I do think that we may be looking at more of a committee situation here than having one person up top.
this is absolutely. I could see her doing it, 1 month or something, and then another person. I could see that.
Do you think committee in terms of I can understand a committee in terms of somebody dealing with the network and somebody creative, but you think there'd be more than one person having a final say? Like the thing with these institutions is with Ebersol had it, or even Jim Domanian shortly. I think that for that show to work, there has to be one person that's saying yes or no. I could see somebody else maybe with her that could have the same title. I mean, Lauren's never given anyone else like that EP title. Maybe two EPs that are dealing with maybe dealing with the network, and she has creative. But could you see two or three people and them like actually doing voting in between dress and live what gets in? I mean,
No, no,
perhaps.
no, 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 no. Absolutely, I can't do that. Could never work.
But John, do you think that could possibly happen? Is that what you were saying? I just wasn't sure.
No, I think everyone would have their defined roles, but I mean, I just think that because it's been on for so long, and these are all children of the show. Like everyone who's done the show now grew up on the show, so for them, I don't think they would ever want to see it die because they feel it's part of their identity. So I think if Tina can't run the show on her own, I think that maybe that there's some sort of her and Jost and Seth and Keenan. Maybe it's a group of them, and they all have their own roles. Someone does the read through, someone does the between dress and air. I mean, I'm sure Steve Higgins will want to stay involved as long as he wants to. So I think that there's a lot of options here on the table, and I think that's probably why we haven't heard of a successor at this point, because there's just too many people who want to keep that show going.
We definitely know that Higgins could do it. We know Seth could do it. There's definitely people that could do it. I want to before John, before I talked about this on the phone with you, Bill, and I just mentioned to John before the show. I think in terms of the writing, this is some of the best this season. And John brought it up. It might have been because this is the 50th, and they're putting everything that they can into this season. But I think the writing is, especially I was watching this past season and this past week rather, and a film piece, it's a lot easier to do a film piece than the live sketch. And I'm just talking the live sketches that are in 8H. I think that they are doing some of the best writing that this season that I've seen in a long time. Maybe even from like when Smigel, Jack Handy, and the Turners, and Christine Zander, and those power players like Franken and Davis. I think the stuff that they're doing now, it's really impressive. I mean, I don't know if there's a correlation that it's the 50th, but it could be. What do you both think?
Well, I mean, I think they really put a lot into the 50th. Yes, absolutely. I think the show often rides on the host being good, and the writing can be good, but if the host can't deliver, there were a couple of hosts this year I thought were weak. um,
They're always gonna be, yeah, there's always and
yeah,
people that you wouldn't expect
and
either.
because they're in fewer sketches, you know that you can tell. And then there are ones where I forget who it was recently. It was in every sketch, basically. And I'm like, okay, they know this is this is a player, this is a person they can play with. I'll tell you what I think. I think the update has been spectacularly well written,
Yes.
spectacularly well written. That is the segment that always makes me laugh out loud. I mean, that has been very, very good, which does bring up the whole thing about Jost and Che and whether or not they're staying. And I mean, you could argue that this is the right time for them to get out, right? It's the 50th. They've had a big year. Che has been saying every year he wants to leave, right?
I would not wanna follow them. That's like Conan following Letterman, someone that's so beloved. I would not want the gig. Colin Quinn trying to take over after Norm was fired, wouldn't want the gig.
But you know what is real interesting, Mark? Because I was thinking about writing something about this. In the history of Weekend Update, right, you've had people who've come on and people said, well, how are they going to do it after X, right? And most of them have been pretty good. Most of them have been pretty good.
It
They're
takes
they're
some time, but yeah.
there's the top level, like Tina and Fallon were on fire, like they like reinvented the thing. But I mean, Seth and Amy were great. I mean, like they were great. It's kind of interesting, and I was thinking about how you would rank them, and there's a few are sort of toward the bottom, but at the top there's quite a few. It has been saved number of times. They've found the right combinations, or a single one person.
People forget though, it took some time. I remember Cecily, no one remembers, was doing Update, and
Yeah,
Colin Jost that first season was like, I mean, they made him re-audition. He's wrote in his book, which is amazing to think about. I mean,
it's the
it took
same thing, Mark.
a
It takes
while.
time
It does.
for a challenging role like that. It just takes time. You got to roll with it, and that was always a big reason why Lorne, because of his power, could sort of back the person. He didn't back Norm all the way, but he he basically stuck with his choices, and generally I mean, Jost is really good now. So you know,
Yeah, I mean, they're phenomenal. I mean, I think that they're definitely, if you're looking at that show, the strongest. I mean, I think in terms of like preference for me, in terms of somebody that's a comedy person, in terms of, I know the public probably different, but Norm Macdonald and what they are doing is like in terms of like for a comedy person, that I just think like they can't be beat. I mean, there's a lot of other people did a great job and stuff, but phenomenal. And I would not again want to follow them, and having to start over or start with something would be really hard. I could see one of them leaving and what they did when and putting
yes,
somebody else in, because that's what Lauren's whole formula is, right? He never wants to start over, and when they do start over, it is hard.
yeah, but the team thing has come and gone, right? They had Jane Curtin and Aykroyd, right? But the team thing has been like, sometimes they've done it and sometimes they haven't done it. I think they would stick with it now. I also think, as much as you're saying you wouldn't want to follow this, right? Every person on that cast will give his blood to get that assignment. That is a great assignment.
Jimmy never wanted that gig and really had to be talked into it. And Jeff Ross was told, through Bernie Brillstein, you have the gig, gets on the airplane. By the time he lands in New York on the East Coast, is told he doesn't have the gig anymore. And I think Jimmy was maybe the one person who didn't want it, but you think probably the most people over there would want that gig.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there are people who are characters. I mean, maybe Bowen Yang wouldn't want it because he's now really emerging as a wide ranging character. But I mean, Sarah Sherman is doing such character work at the desk. I could see them thinking she could do it. I mean, I just don't know what Lauren wants in that job now, except the back and forth with Che and Jost has taken on its own level. It's just, and the joke writing is so edgy now. They are so edgy. It's just
John, do you think that SNL could get away with having the edginess and the sketches as edgy, that the stuff that they do on Update? Because it's familiar. It has that kind of feel like to the 70s, where they could do stuff that if they did now in those sketches, I don't know. It almost seems like the crowd. It's like the crowd. They know that they're going to get like things that could be so edgy that could be borderline offensive, and that is like what they do. Versus if they did those in sketches, if they could get away with that.
Well, I think at the beginning of this season, I saw a lot from Che where he would say an edgy joke and then he would cross it out on be like, oh, well, it's the 90s, and he would make fun of himself as almost to like cover up his own joke about being edgy. And I think that post SNL 50, it's almost like they have nothing to lose. So they are just going at it hard. And I think that one of the underrated stories of Colin potentially leaving the show is you lose him from the writer's room, because I think he writes really great, edgy sketches, most of them pre-tapes, that have been a really big part of the last few seasons. And I think that for him, he's been in the show for 20 years. That is, for me, one of the really, really hard things about him potentially leaving. So do I think that the live sketches can be as edgy? Probably they just don't go in that direction. They don't have the group at the show to be able to pull that off. But I think as far as the writing team is concerned on Update, that's what they're getting. And again, I think a big name to watch out for is Rosebud Baker, who was on the writing staff, got moved to the writing Update team this season. And if they're going to do some sort of transition where Jost leaves and Chase stays, he's very good friends with Rosebud. So we could get maybe one season of them.
She's a very funny stand-up. Her work is all over the internet.
Can I just say one thing about Rosebud? Can I?
Yeah.
I was stunned to learn who her grandfather was. He was Secretary of State.
Oh, is it James Baker?
James Baker is her grandfather. Right. It's amazing.
I didn't know that. Wow.
That's amazing to me.
I don't think I knew that. Talk about nepotism.
I just looked her up once, and I was like, "What is her? Her father's name happens to be James Baker." So I thought, "Gee, could her grandfather be?" And it was him. It is him. It's just remarkable.
That was a nepotism joke because politics, it would never get her the job. I was just joking.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one person that might be leaving. There's at least been a little bit of whispering who I think would, on the writing side, has contributed so much to the show. And if Mikey Day does leave, in terms of the writing, I don't think the public knows how valuable he has been to the show. And some of the, I would think, high percentage of sketches that if people say these are my favorite sketches of the last 10 years, have Mikey Day's initials on them, and losing him would be very, very hard.
I think something's the public doesn't know anything about the writers. They don't know specific writer. I mean, you have to be inside to pay attention to that. Who wrote what sketch? They don't know that. They might miss it when he's gone, though. But,
I think that it'll definitely be a tough for somebody to jump in that is such a machine and so specialized. What do you think, John?
Well, if you lose Colin Jost, you hold on to Streeter Seidel for dear life. Like, he is the most valuable person in that writer's room. August White is also a really good up-and-coming writer who's been done a lot of stuff in the last couple of years, but Streeter is the guy. I think you keep him give him whatever contract, blank check, just because he's so valuable to the show. If you lost Colin and Streeter, I don't think that the writing group has the consistency to be able to pull off something where the new era looks remotely good. So I would be concerned about that.
I have to ask, I don't know what Colin would do right after this. I don't know. Maybe he'll perform or write movie. I don't know what he'll do.
He could host a late night show.
Why would Mikey Day leave? Why would he leave?
I think the same reason a lot of people do is because they've been on the show for, I don't know how many years he's been on. John would know in terms of on camera and then as a writer, just other aspirations. I mean, he did so well as a host. I don't think he wants that gig when he was doing that Netflix show he was hosting, which introduced himself to a whole group of younger people that wouldn't watch SNL. But people have aspirations to do movies, to do half hour stuff like Will Ferrell, Will Forte and Armisen that are doing all these things like Hater, going at HBO and doing something completely different. And he has the talent to do it. And it's just those 20 weeks out of the year limit you in some aspects, and I think it's burnout. And I just think, I mean, these jobs for the most part were supposed to be designed for 5 years, and then you leave and someone else takes that is never going to come back. Yes, but I mean, that would be the reason I would think possibly he would want to leave. But in terms of a skill set, he is one of the best writers that's gone through the show, no doubt.
You remember that Mikey Day was on with Leno?
Oh, he was a correspondent on the
Yeah.
Jay Leno
Yes,
show
he
at 10
was.
o'clock.
Yeah,
I
he
forgot
was.
about that. I forget a lot of things about the Jay Leno show, Bill.
Yeah.
We do a lot of deep analytics on the Saturday Night Network, and one of the most interesting things from this season, a storyline that doesn't get talked about in the mainstream media, is that for the last few seasons, veterans like Mikey and Heidi were really big parts of the show. In season 50, they've taken a major step back. Keenan, Mikey, Heidi, they're really not in as much things. As far as Sarah Sherman, Andrew Dismukes, like Bowen, those are the ones that have really stepped up in season 50. So I do think that if those players stay around, the Heidis and the Mikeys, the people who've been on for 8 or 9 years, they are the ones who are probably just going to pop in every now and then to stabilize sketches, and the stars of sketches or the vehicles will be around people like Andrew, people like James, people like
And
Sarah.
Marcello too. I think
Marcelo, of course, yeah.
yeah.
Well, were you surprised? And I just didn't see this coming, that Dan Bula has the vanity cards where he's been doing these sketches where a writer can actually get their name on a sketch, kind of like Smigel with Funhouse. And I know Strader just did a sketch that got cut at Dress, but he did a cartoon with his name on it that got cut at Dress. I wonder if that is something that we're going to be seeing, because that, like, Robert will tell me, he's like, Mark, no one would know who I was. And if that, people weren't, if my name wasn't on that every week, you never foresaw that ever happening with Robert, and that might be a new trend.
I think, with Bula, he's touring with Sandler, and he wrote with him before that. He has a lot of leverage. I think once you start getting leverage in the writer's room, you can pull that stuff off. And, you look at Please Don't Destroy, who had a lot of connections to the show before they came in. And I think if you're sitting in the writer's room and you see that Please Don't Destroy is getting, tours every summer and they're becoming big names, and you're saying, like, why them and not me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely. I mean, you saw, like, with certain people, certain writers. Do you remember Scott? People are not going to remember who this person is, but Scott Wainio was a writer on SNL who did Mango, and they gave him a few sketches that he did he did that thing with the microphone where there wasn't a microphone in his hand, and he was interviewing people. So once in a while, they'll throw writers to do things like that. It just doesn't happen a lot. I just didn't know if that's something that might be more happening a little bit more. But Bula's sketches have done really well, and I thought Strader's sketch that
How do
got
you know
cut.
whose sketches are whose? What do you do to you pay? I mean, John does it all the time, but do you know, Mark? Can you tell whose
I
sketches?
can a lot of times tell if it's a Strader Mikey Day sketch. I could tell. I could tell a Smigel sketch, a Fred Wolf sketch. A lot of times, a James Anderson sketch and Paul Appel. I could tell. There were certain people that just have certain just something about them. Sometimes people will use inside jokes. Dale Butterworth, that it's an Andy Breckman sketch. If somebody's named Dale Butterworth in a sketch, so I mean, John can speak more on this, but I normally will go on X, on what used to be Twitter, and a lot of times people will the writers and the cast members will say who wrote what, and that's the only way I know for sure. But I can definitely I'm good with certain writers on my guesses. Not always right, but sometimes.
Yeah, social media has changed the game, right? Because then they're part of watching the show and having that second screen experience is being able to go and follow people who work at the show and see who gets credited for those sketches. Oftentimes, we'll talk about it on the SNN, because I think that it's hard to do analysis on a sketch and discuss why it worked or didn't work if you don't understand who wrote it. And I think I've had conversations with friends at NBC about this, and they've said to me, I didn't know that people cared about this much.
Yeah.
And I said, well, of course. I mean, we want to talk to the NFL head coach and find out why you drew up the play that way. Like, this is part of the process. So I think that everything that goes into how the show gets to the way it is on Saturday at 11:30 is an important part of being able to analyze if it was a good week or not.
But the writers don't really do publicity.
They're starting to more, though. I think it's changing.
Social media.
Yeah. And I think, it goes back to our conversation about Tina and the future of the show. I think that there's certain things that have to happen for the show to exist in the future. One, I think, is the writers, being publicized and, having roles on the show, I think is really important. And then the fact that the show is going global, I think that that's something that is way different from what it was 20 years ago. And Bill, Mark, I don't want to interject here, but I'd be very curious what Bill thinks about this, because obviously they just announced SNL UK. So Lauren is going to be executive producer of that. And I think it's fascinating because, before social media, before YouTube, the show was watched primarily by North Americans. Now we have people in Australia, people in Europe who will watch the show every single week. and are just dying to see clips of the show. And the show is sort of still living in 10 years ago, where things are geo-blocked and it's really focused on what happens in the United States. I'm curious your perspective, if you think for the future of the show it needs to go more global.
Because the UK version is not going to be, is going to be with UK people, right?
But should it be? Should it be? I mean, it'll be UK people on the
Yeah,
show, but should
yeah.
Americans be able to watch
Oh
SNL
yeah.
UK?
Who wouldn't watch that? I mean, of course, the British have tremendous comedy performers, but it was done. It was done. I know it was done in France. You can see the French cowbell sketch
Right.
on YouTube. I don't know if you've seen that, but yes, the French did a cowbell sketch, and the audience loved it. They really did love it, but they didn't like the show much. It never became a thing there, and a lot of it is sort of cultural. I mean, is it going to be on Saturday night at 11:30? Right, in all these markets? Well, some places they probably won't be up and do that. Watch that. I don't know. I find transferring American culture is not the easiest thing. It's very easy in music, but comedy is a different animal. It really is a different animal. I mean, I interviewed this guy, Gad Malaya, I guess his name is. Right? Yeah, he was a gigantic comic in France. Really gigantic, and it was on my Sirius radio show, and I was sort of interested, and he said his English was good, not fantastic, but good. And he said, well, I want to become the biggest comic in America too. And I was like, wow, that is a small order. And that's years ago. And what's he done since then? So I think comedy is challenging for everybody's sense of humor is fed by their surroundings and how they grew up and stuff. So on the other hand, Trevor Noah did it. So
I mean, it's tough. I mean, with the American version of The Office, when they brought it here, they started off more subtle with Carell, and then they had to go more broad. I mean, I know people who I'm friends with that still can't watch the Gervais version, and I still tolerate them as friends. But I mean, you would, the three of us, I'm guessing, I'm speaking for the two of you, love that subtlety stuff with the British things, but it doesn't always culturally play. I mean, they
correct.
had to make it way more broad as the episodes went along.
Yeah.
I mean, it was necessary for network television for a mass audience.
But I think if you're going to make this work, there has to be some sort of continuity between the two series. Like, I think you bring in a Keenan potentially to host SNL UK so that there is the interest from the American audience follows overseas. I read about this with basketball a lot, where basketball became, as a sport, a lot less popular until the NBA allowed them to put highlights on social media and for people to clip out their own moments where you could just see a quick thing of a game. Like, I think that's the future of the show, is that SNL is comedy, but it is very close to live sports.
Bill and John, I want to ask you, do you really think that this is going to happen, that Lorne Michaels is going to be going over there, he's an EP, and telling these people that get hired, you're going to be staying up all night Tuesday in London, you're going to be on whatever floor, and this is what we're going to do for no rhyme or reason, that they're adhere by that, or that Lorne will take those things that worked here and go and have those over there for whatever reason?
I can't imagine. In Susan Morrison's book, she points out that there's no reason for them to keep doing this way. It's
No.
just that Lorne has decided that this is how it works, and you exhaust people to the point of them being addle-brained, and that's how you get creativity. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, because I think I've always found that in the cycles that they do, 3 at a time, and then they go to repeat. The third one is the best. It happens a lot because it feels like they're just so tired, and their creativity is, and they just come up with craziness. And I think that is a factor. But they don't have to do an all-nighter. You don't have to do that anymore. I think that I can't imagine Lorne enforcing that necessarily, and I can't imagine him being that involved, to be honest. I mean, he'll set it up maybe and all that. I can't imagine him just throwing himself into it. The guy is 80 years old. Okay, I mean, we shouldn't have had a president who was 80. And I don't know if we should have
John,
a
what do you think?
SNL person.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's the first like English language other version of SNL. I do think that getting it right is really important. So I could see him being very involved at the start, or maybe he has, a Tina Fey who is like sort of his, consigliere to go over
Yeah,
there and take care of it for him. So that's possible. But it's really funny to me because I don't think I've even said this on the SNN, but a couple seasons ago, I got a call from a current cast member in pretty much the middle of the night on a Tuesday evening asking me what they thought of the sketch that they were putting together.
really.
And it was really fascinating. And I was like, okay, I think you should like tweak this just a little bit or tweak that. And then they were like, don't tell anybody I called you or I'll have to kill you. And I
Yeah.
think it's like one of those things that
Did
they're
they
just,
do it, John? Did they do it?
they put it together. Yeah.
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 And
I
it
mean,
got on
did they
air.
do the tweak?
It did go.
Did they do the tweak that you
They did.
suggested? Okay.
So it wasn't, yeah, I mean, it was obviously was worked on a little bit more and became more polished as the week went on. And I definitely don't deserve a writing credit for this, but it was just interesting for me to just see firsthand how desperate they were to just get the approval of the audience early on. It was almost like cheating a little bit, where they were like,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to early in the week find out if this is good or not. And I don't know if that still works or not.
The one documentary that isn't talked about enough, and I don't think it's on any streaming right now, that if people that are listening really want to feel anxiety, is that James Franco did a documentary where he was following John Malkovich hosting, and you just see on people like Casey Wilson and certain people that are trying as newcomers to get stuff on the air, and
Yeah.
even someone like a Will Forte, and just stuff going into dress rehearsal, and oh my goodness, I don't think I've ever seen anything that's been done to that extent, where you really feel like you're following them around on a Tuesday night, when they're writing, and through Wednesday, through everything, where you're just this roller coaster of emotions that you just really are empathizing with these people that every single week are going to battle. But if you can find it, it might be on YouTube, it might be somewhere. But I think that that's an excellent.
I'd love to see that. It's always interesting in Susan's book. There are scenes in that the passages when she's talking about the week in progress, where Lauren says, "We don't have so and so in. We got to get so and so in. We got to get," like he's thinking that he can't leave them out too long. And I also thought it probably there's got to be times when they're just failing and he can't save them. Like the desperation has to be terrible if you're a player. I mean, who's the guy? Who is the guy? The sort of handsome young,
Michael Longfellow.
yeah, Michael Longfellow. He did something recently that was pretty good, but he disappears for long periods of time. And I wonder, is he in a panic? Is he in a cold sweat? Like it's got to be tough.
I think they're keeping him on the bench, unfortunately. I don't think it's. I think that part of this bill is this goes back to, COVID, and then the writer's strike, where SNL, when they were casting new cast members, couldn't go to the traditional sketch troupes and find people, so they were forced to hire stand-ups who are all very talented, but it's sort of like square peg round hole, where they were trying to put them in the sketch format, and it takes a lot longer for these people to morph into the show. So you have a bunch of stand-ups that are in their second, third, fourth years, and now you're starting to see with the rookies like a little bit more sketch. But somebody like Michael is a great stand-up and does really well as a game show host. He would be great on Weekend Update, but in a sketch format, it's not always the perfect fit.
When you said they're putting him on the bench, do you think it's because they can't find anything for him, or they're saving him for something else? When you put somebody on the bench, you might use them later.
I think that this is the summer to get that answer, right? So if he ends up getting Weekend Update, which last week when he was on the show could have been an audition, that answers that question. And I think he was so good last week on Update that I said that I think that he also might have nothing to lose. He may be in a position where he's either going to get the desk, or maybe he's not on the show next year.
I think we need to look at certain people's careers, like Will Forte and Armisen, where people, I think, forget that they took at least 4 or 5 years to get over with the audience, if not more. And you have someone like, how many years has Michael Longfellow been on now? Is it 3? Is it
3,
he started in 48, so yeah, this is his third year on the show.
third season? That it's just the metrics sometimes for certain people. It's just, for whatever rhyme or reason, sometimes you have people that break out. I mean, Armisen was right away very much given some airtime with his, the Fernando, that was his sketch, right? The breakout thing that he did like very
Faricito.
early. Yes.
I
It just
think
took a
that
little.
was his audition.
Yeah, it just all I'm saying is that for them to get over with the audience and to really get, I just think it just takes different people more time. Whereas someone like I feel like Sarah Sherman just right out the gate, it seemed like that very quickly was like she got pushed right away. It just doesn't happen a lot. Wig as well, Kristen Wiig, and rightfully so. Yeah,
Well,
Kate.
Armisen got lucky, I guess, because Obama got elected. Right? They made him Obama for for a couple of years, right?
I
It
think
really,
he regrets that a little bit, though.
That was really, of course, it was awkward as hell. But at least
yeah,
he was on. That meant he was going to be on. You know, they have to do sketches with the president. He was going to be on. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Also, different era and smaller cast where he sort of had more opportunities to go up to bat. But with somebody, when you have a 17-person cast or 15
that's
if you take
insane,
Judge
by
J.
the way.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
never gonna go back. It will never go back. The original cast, 7 people.
Oh,
When you
never.
had Dana Carvey and Phil Hartman and Nora Dunn, and you had 7 people plus a featured, which was Nealon at 8, and then you brought in, I guess, Mike Myers featured. You're at 9 people. That is the way to get for America to know who you are,
Absolutely.
and it's the
Absolutely.
best way. But in terms of them, it just seems like we want to put as many people to give ourselves as many odds, like Vegas, to hit the jackpot with somebody.
Yep. Hmm.
And diversity. Their diversity has become more important to the show. So they feel like they can have different experiences and backgrounds with comedy to mine from.
I remember I was doing a piece about spending a week at the show or something at some point, and they I forget what they oh, it was a debate week. It was like they were going to do a debate sketch for sure. But I was there for them doing the rehearsal, and at this point, I was only vaguely aware of her. But Kate McKinnon did this thing at the desk, right, where she played the woman who messed up the painting,
Yeah,
and I was
Cecilia.
like, "Who the hell is this?" This was like, I just watched the rehearsal. And I was like, "Wow, is she great? Holy mackerel!" And I was like, "That happens. That's what happens. They find one thing that's so spectacular, and then everybody says, "Wow, that's one of the stars."
And that's to me Padilla this year, by the way. I think that she is
Who?
so good. Ashley
Who?
Padilla, the new
Uh-huh.
rookie that was
Yeah.
hired. Just for me, I'm just so utterly impressed with her, and she's one of the best prospects I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, we have to go. I'm so glad that we got to do this. Bill, I often say when we talk on the phone, we're incapable of talking for 5 minutes on the phone or even 3. I'll
Yep.
call you and say, Bill, I just have one quick question. And then, sorry, it's an hour and 15
Yeah,
later.
and I've missed a meal. That's usually what happens.
Yes. And sometimes, I mean, those recordings are podcasted in itself. And talking to John, we've never publicly done something like this on what for here. You've been kind enough to have me on your show, but I just want to introduce you to my audience here, which I'm really happy to do. We should do this again. I would really love maybe in a couple months or every few months, the 3 of us. I mean, there's so few people, and I'm guessing you feel the same way, perhaps not, that I can have a conversation like this with, that I feel like knows so much. I mean, I learned from both of you. Every time I talk to you, I learn so much, and that doesn't happen a lot. So, I mean, I feel so fortunate that you got to be here for the show and for my audience, and I'm so grateful.
All right, I enjoyed it. It's time for lunch, though.
Bill Carter, yes, yes. Check out LateNighter.com. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, John. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. On Apple Podcasts, please rate it and leave a review. Be sure to go to LateNighter.com for all your late night TV news. And you can find my podcast at LateNighter.com/podcasts. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.